criminal violence from the muzzle of a gun has once again brought heartbreak to America. Surely, this must be clear beyond question. The hour has come for the Congress to enact a strong and effective gun control law.
The 2020 presidential election campaigns are already underway as candidates from both the Democratic and Republican parties travel to different states in hope of attracting voters. One of the issues presidential candidates are debating over is gun control.
Stop and frisk. It works, and it was meant for problems like Chicago.
One of my proposals is to actually help gun owners upgrade their guns to personalized guns free of charge.
To me, there's no excuse why background checks are not mandatory.
Both political parties have differing opinions on gun control and how to reduce gun violence, from stop and frisk laws, personalized guns, mandatory universal background checks, and many more proposals. The recent spark of public mass shootings has provoked many of these discussions and proposals regarding gun control. However, the media neglects to acknowledge local shootings in impoverished regions.
There are so many people, kids, families, who are losing their lives every day in cities like Chicago and Detroit and others who we never hear of.
Local shootings don't receive as much attention from the media when compared to mass shootings, even though for the United States in 2017, 14,542 people were killed using guns, while 441 people died in mass shootings. For the 2020 presidential election, we asked candidates to focus on addressing solutions to gun violence in impoverished regions.
The biggest indicator of crime, every sociology worth its salt will tell you this, is not color, it's poverty.
When I was younger, I used to live in Fairhaven, and it was a really dangerous area for gun violence, and my street was known to be one of the hot zones. So when I was younger, I used to have to get accompanied by an adult wherever I'd go, and one night, a stray bullet went through my living room window. From that point, my mom just had to get us out of there. In Connecticut, gun violence is the second leading cause of death for children and teens. New Haven and Fairhaven, towns located in the southern region of Connecticut, have become hot zones for gun violence within the state. New Haven families have an average annual salary of $24,688, whereas families in Greenwich, a wealthy town in Connecticut near New York, enjoy an average annual salary over 3 times the amount New Haven residents see. To go along with this drastic discrepancy in salary, there is also a large gap in violent crimes. Greenwich only sees 21 violent crimes annually, while New Haven sees over 1,000 violent crimes a year. This goes to prove one of many examples of impoverished neighborhoods being the victim of violence caused in large part by the lack of monetary incentive. Of the total gun homicides in Connecticut, just New Haven, Bridgeport, and Hartford accounted for 71% of the deaths. These 3 towns are also among the poorest towns in Connecticut, which further demonstrates that the biggest indicator of crime is poverty. And one of the many long-term problems with gun violence is that the threat itself, it instills fear in its communities.
Recently, there was a shooting at the end of my street. This caused neighbors and friends to be more fearful when going outside throughout the day.
With lax gun control regulations, it is impossible to know who is carrying a gun and if that person is responsible enough to own a weapon. Sometimes, legally purchased firearms can be stolen by an irresponsible adult, which can lead to a fatal accident.
I'm definitely more nervous when going outside. There's definitely something on my mind when I leave the house to walk somewhere.
It's pretty good. I've always seen on the news these shootings, outbreaks recently, a lot of school shootings happening, and I never thought that it happened so close to me.
However, creating legislation to strengthen gun control isn't as easy as it sounds. It is important to consider the many viewpoints in the current political climate.
Every day, citizens across America exercise their constitutional right to defend themselves, their families, and their communities. That's a constitutional right.
Many conservatives want to protect the Second Amendment, which states, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to secure a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This amendment is intended to protect citizens' rights to carry firearms. While gun control legislation is still possible under the Second Amendment, it has become increasingly difficult to draw the line between what is constitutionally protected and what isn't.
I feel like there should be a lot more background checks and there should be a lot more stricter regulations regarding the usage of guns, especially in neighborhoods.
On the other hand, some liberals are proposing for varying legislation such as assault weapon bans, universal background checks, and gun buyback programs. I think they should focus on strengthening the rigidity of gun violence legislation, be it more in-depth background checks and mental health checks prior to that, because a lot of mass shooters have been victim to mental illness, and I think that should be a thing that is checked before anybody is allowed to legally own a gun. While most of these proposals will be in effect on a federal level if enacted, it is important to consider gun violence regulations on a state level. Gun violence in Chicago is certainly not the same as gun violence in Miami, as both cities have vastly different economic and social demographics. This year, for the 2020 presidential election, we urge presidential candidates to enact strong and effective gun regulations on the federal level, while also taking state necessities into consideration.